If betrayal completely shatters trust, maybe leaving behind a really devastating secret, what obligations actually remain when a marriage is, fundamentally broken? And does the sheer weight of that secret fundamentally question the very nature of the vows people make? Today, we are diving deep into a really profound moral dilemma. It's one that explores the raw human cost of broken trust, the incredibly complex choices that follow, and the ripple effects that last, well, potentially forever across entire families. We're inviting you to consider every facet of its lasting impact as we sift through the narratives and insights in our source material. So today, we're unpacking a truly, truly heartbreaking narrative. It really began with a childhood turned completely upside down. We're looking at a story centered on a family where the parents were married and the father's cheating had this profound, deep impact on his then young child. This isn't just about, a marriage ending. It's a testament to how deeply these actions can scar individuals and really reshape entire family dynamics, sometimes for generations.
That's absolutely right. And the details here are, frankly, particularly brutal. Our primary narrative kicks off when a child, who's the narrator of this story, was just 7 years old. Their whole world was shaken by the sudden divorce of their parents. And the catalyst, the devastating reason for this huge shift, was the mother's discovery that her husband had been cheating. And not just for a short time, but for a staggering 5 years.
5 years.
5 years. And it wasn't just with anyone. It was with someone the mother genuinely considered a close friend.
Oh, that's rough.
It's not merely infidelity. It was a double betrayal from both her husband and a trusted friend. That left an incredibly deep, lasting wound, utterly shattering what was supposed to be a safe place, a sanctuary for the family, especially considering they had 2 kids. And the cheating, it wasn't some quiet secret that just gently surfaced over time. No, the truth kind of exploded onto their lives. And the timing, it was during what should have been a happy occasion. The narrator's own birthday party?
At the birthday party?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah. The father had apparently concocted this elaborate lie, faking a funeral to explain why he wasn't there. The reality, he was at an ultrasound appointment with the woman he was seeing. This woman would later become his new wife and, maybe most shockingly, the mother of his 6 children. And what makes this betrayal particularly agonizing, truly gut-wrenching, is the timing, as I mentioned. The affair began right after the mother almost died during a very dangerous pregnancy that went terribly wrong.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it led to the tragic loss of a baby and, subsequently, her inability to have any more children.
So while she was recovering from that trauma.
Exactly. Imagine the contrast. She's in a hospital bed, grieving this immense loss, probably clinging to the very people who should have been her strongest support system. And meanwhile, her husband and her friend were secretly building a new life together.
That's beyond calculation.
It wasn't just infidelity. It was, as the source suggests, a tale of calculated meanness, profound disrespect. It left scars that words can barely describe. The mother, despite being strong, apparently confessed she never truly got over what they did to her. She made her boundaries really clear and chose her own peace over pretending everything was okay. Years later, the narrator recounts this ongoing tension, especially regarding their father's new family. And a really crucial point comes up during the narrator's high school graduation. The father, who is now facing significant financial problems after quitting his job with his new wife, actually expected to be invited to the graduation party, a party hosted by the narrator's mother.
The woman he betrayed, he expected an invitation to her house.
That's right. That expectation, despite his past actions and the massive wound he'd left, well, it speaks volumes about his perceived rights within this fractured family.
And that specific instance, this expectation of an invitation to a celebration hosted by the woman he had so deeply wronged, that sparked a fierce confrontation, didn't it? Where the narrator finally just laid bare years of unspoken truths. The father's cheating was finally identified, unequivocally, as the root cause of the family's deep, deep dysfunction. It's a moment of, I think, profound personal courage. And it echoes a universal human experience, right? That need to confront the past to even begin healing the present. This story isn't just about one family. It feels like a microcosm of the wider human experience of dealing with betrayal and its enduring shadow. But beyond this specific family, our source material also asks us to consider a broader scenario, more of a hypothetical.
Indeed it does. The source also discusses a more general scenario, asking us, and you the listener, to consider situations where a partner, let's call her Jane, faces a serious health problem. She requires significant support following a difficult diagnosis. And this immediately raises the question, what is the ethical obligation to provide that support to a partner? particularly if deep betrayal, like the kind we just discussed, has already occurred and left the other person completely emotionally empty.
Right. Can you even give that support authentically?
Exactly. This deep dive is really about exploring that very question, especially regarding obligations when trust is just fundamentally broken. And even in families that might seem simpler on the surface, maybe with just two kids, these types of deep trust issues resonate throughout the entire family structure. They profoundly affect every single member. The source challenges us to reconcile our, innate sense of duty with the stark reality of personal pain, especially when the very foundation of the relationship might have been built on a lie or completely destroyed by one.
Okay, let's unpack this because,
Yeah.
wow, this narrative, both a personal story and the broader hypothetical, throws several really intense moral dilemmas into sharp relief. What are we truly obligated to do when our vows are just shattered? It's a question that cuts right to the core of personal integrity, duty, and crucially, self-preservation. When the vows of for better or worse in sickness and in health are made, they're usually offered with an assumption, right? An assumption of mutual fidelity, respect.
A baseline of trust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what happens when one party completely abrogates those fundamental principles through something like prolonged cheating?
That's precisely the central tension. The fundamental question centers on those vows and obligations, as you said. Marriage vows typically promise support, right? For better or worse, sickness and in health. But does this obligation persist with the same weight, the same meaning, when one party has profoundly violated those vows through cheating, deceit, maybe years of it? This isn't hypothetical for our narrator's mother, it's her lived reality. And she made a choice. She chose self-preservation. She refused to play happy families with her ex-husband and his new family. Her choice to prioritize her own peace, despite any lingering societal expectations or maybe even personal guilt, it highlights this intense struggle between perceived obligations and the profound need for self-preservation after such deep hurt.
It's a powerful statement about reclaiming your own emotional well-being.
Absolutely. It's acknowledging that true emotional support just cannot be extracted from a well that's been poisoned by betrayal. And then on the other side, you have the father. Despite his past actions that caused immense pain and basically created a new family on the ruins of the old one, he expected an invitation to his child's graduation party hosted by his ex-wife. This demonstrates, maybe, a perceived right to family connection without truly acknowledging or perhaps even fully understanding the prior betrayal and the lasting damage it inflicted.
Like the consequences didn't apply to him.
It seems that way. This expectation clashes directly with the mother's established boundaries and also with the narrator's emotional capacity. It created a situation just ripe for conflict. The very idea of an obligation to extend hospitality or provide support in those circumstances feels like a forced performance, doesn't it? Especially when the foundational contract of trust has been so deeply, irrevocably broken.
And this isn't just a private internal struggle people face alone, is it? The concept of a community verdict, like we see in online discussions, becomes incredibly important here. It offers a broader collective perspective on these very intimate choices. What does society, or at least, a vocal segment of it online, expect from individuals caught in such painful moral quandaries?
Yeah, that adds another layer.
It really does. It adds another layer of complexity to these deeply personal dilemmas because external judgments can amplify or complicate that internal struggle, that struggle to balance self-preservation with what you feel might be your duty.
Absolutely. The core internal dilemma for the individual involves balancing that desire to heal and protect oneself, what we call self-preservation, against the societal or maybe personal expectation to provide emotional support or maintain familial connections, especially during times of vulnerability, like a serious health diagnosis in the hypothetical Jane scenario. The source poses it really starkly. Can you truly give comfort without hurting yourself even more from a moral point of view?
That's a heavy question.
It really is. The challenge is real. How much can you possibly give when you are already emotionally empty because of past trauma? When you've been hurt again and again, your capacity for genuine support just diminishes. It has to. This creates a profound internal conflict where the right thing to do isn't immediately clear. Often it involves choosing the path that, while maybe difficult in the moment, leads to long-term healing rather than continued emotional exhaustion. It's a painful kind of calculus that forces you to reevaluate what obligations truly mean in the face of profound personal devastation.
What truly resonates with me here, and maybe with you listening too, is how this kind of deep betrayal isn't just a single event. It's almost like a psychological earthquake, isn't it? It structurally alters an individual's entire relational framework. How does that profound shock fundamentally reshape how someone trusts, how they connect with others. Here's where it gets really interesting when we dive into the psychological fallout.
It's a critical point, and the source clearly illustrates the psychological fallout. The narrator's mother, as we heard, never truly got over what they did to her. She experienced a huge shattering of how she saw the world. This isn't just sadness or anger. This demonstrates deep, pervasive trauma. Trauma that permeated her life, making her guarded, protective, influencing every subsequent interaction and decision she made. It's a fundamental reordering of her sense of safety and trust in the world and in people.
You can see how that would happen.
And for the narrator, remember those years of silent anger, feeling ignored. It all culminated in that powerful emotional outburst at their father during that graduation party discussion. This eruption, it wasn't about taking sides, as the father dismissively suggested. It was a necessary, probably long overdue release of held feelings. It shows the existence of potent triggers, the father's entitlement, perhaps that brought years of suppressed pain and resentment boiling to the surface.
It was a reaction to his audacity, right? Expecting reconciliation without any accountability.
Exactly. A breaking point where years of suppressed trauma finally demanded to be acknowledged. And the idea of emotional exhaustion is absolutely central to understanding the inability to provide support in such scenarios. The source highlights that key question again. When you're emotionally empty from being hurt again and again, can you truly give comfort without hurting yourself even more? Extent. This isn't about a lack of willingness to be kind or compassionate. It's a genuine, profound depletion of emotional resources. It's a result of repeated betrayal and the ongoing stress of the trauma.
Your emotional well is just dry.
Or worse, toxic. Psychologically, this emotional exhaustion isn't a choice people make. It's a physiological and mental state where the capacity to empathize, to actively listen, or to offer comfort is simply gone. It's depleted. It speaks to the reality that emotional capacity isn't infinite, especially after deep wounds have been inflicted. It leaves an individual operating on fumes, constantly wary of new triggers that might push them over the edge.
And what's particularly striking, I think, is the lasting nature of this emotional impact. The cheating didn't just end the marriage. It literally changed how I saw the world, as the narrator says. It left a lasting mark on how I understand trust and promises. It created this persistent worry about hidden problems under the surface in future relationships.
That fear of history repeating itself.
Exactly. This illustrates how trauma doesn't just magically pass with time. It reshapes an individual's entire relational framework. It creates new triggers, new anxieties that can persist for years, maybe a lifetime. It's like this constant underlying hum of anxiety, a cautious approach to intimacy and commitment. The initial betrayal creates a lens through which all future interactions are viewed, always with a cautious eye for potential re-injury. And that makes offering future emotional support incredibly difficult, doesn't it? Even in seemingly unrelated contexts, it's like living with a broken compass, constantly questioning the direction of trust. So considering this profound psychological fallout and how trust is just irrevocably reshaped by trauma and emotional exhaustion, how do our traditional ethical frameworks even begin to grapple with these shattered vows and obligations? So what does this all mean when we look at it through an ethical lens?
Well, this situation perfectly embodies a clash between two major ethical viewpoints: deontological and utilitarian ethics. Let's try and break those down a bit. The deontological perspective, broadly speaking, argues that duties and vows are absolute. They're non-negotiable. From this viewpoint, the marriage vows in sickness and in health create an unwavering obligation to provide support, regardless of any past betrayal.
So the promise is the promise, no matter what.
Pretty much. The moral action from this perspective is to uphold the duty itself, the promise made. This implies that, in that general scenario with Jane needing care after a diagnosis, the main character should prioritize Jane's comfort and offer support. Why? Because of the moral rule: fulfill your vows. But this raises some really profound questions, doesn't it? Does a duty really remain binding when the other party has completely destroyed their side of the agreement? If a vow is broken so fundamentally, does the foundation for all subsequent duties just collapse?
It feels like a rigid framework.
It can feel incredibly cold, yes, especially in the face of raw human pain. It potentially prioritizes the abstract principle over the lived experience of trauma. It forces a difficult question. Is the act of fulfilling a vow always ethical, even if the spirit, the trust underlying that vow has been profoundly violated? Okay, then the utilitarian perspective comes at it from a different angle. It focuses on consequences. The goal is to minimize overall harm and maximize overall well-being for everyone involved. So this approach would weigh the harm of not providing support, say, to Jane after her diagnosis, against the harm of forcing oneself to provide that support while experiencing profound emotional exhaustion and ongoing trauma from the past betrayal.
So it's about the outcome, the greater good.
Essentially, yes. A utilitarian might ask, look, if forcing yourself to provide support actually makes both you and the person receiving it feel worse in the long run because it's steeped in resentment, it's inauthentic, is that truly maximizing overall well-being? This framework forces a painful kind of calculus, whose suffering takes precedence. And what truly constitutes the greater good when trust is shattered? It might suggest that prioritizing the stability and the long-term healing of all involved, which could very well include setting firm boundaries for self-preservation, might actually lead to less overall suffering down the line. It's less about a rigid rule and more about the least harm for everyone involved.
Which acknowledges that forcing emotional support from a place of deep hurt might actually do more damage.
Exactly. More damage in the long run to everyone involved, including the person being supported by what feels like a resentful, inauthentic gesture.
And beyond these maybe more academic frameworks, there's this powerful pull towards authenticity. We've touched on it. But what does it truly mean to be yourself and act from an honest place when such deep wounds exist? Especially when those around you, maybe family or friends, might expect a performance of forgiveness or, familial unity. Is there an obligation to perform an honesty you don't actually feel?
That's where the concept of authenticity becomes absolutely critical here. How can someone genuinely offer support and fulfill perceived obligations from a place of honesty when that means suppressing deep personal hurt and trauma? It feels almost impossible. Think about the narrator's act of speaking their truth to their father. It's because of your affair, not mom. That was an act of profound authenticity. It was about taking back their narrative, refusing to perpetuate the lie that somehow the mother was unreasonable.
Asserting the reality of the situation.
Precisely. Asserting the truth of their family's brokenness, rather than upholding a facade for the sake of appearances or, making the father feel comfortable. This choice, though undoubtedly painful and confrontational, was about aligning their actions with their internal truth and the stark reality of the past. It was refusing to perform a fake loyalty or an act of forgiveness they didn't genuinely feel. To do otherwise would only deepen their own emotional exhaustion and likely further entrench the trauma. Authenticity in this context isn't about being needlessly cruel. It's about honoring your own emotional landscape and setting clear, truthful foundations for any future interactions, if there are to be any.
It means acknowledging that real support can only come from a place of emotional capacity and honesty.
Yes, not from obligation or a desire to maintain appearances. It's about choosing psychological integrity over social performance, even when that's the harder path.
So if we're not just bound by absolute vows that feel broken, and we're struggling with this profound emotional exhaustion, what are the viable alternatives? How do we move forward in these incredibly complex situations? How do we manage the broken pieces of relationships shattered by betrayal in a way that prioritizes healing, even if it's painful or looks different from the norm?
Well, the source offers implicit alternatives through the actions and reactions of the characters. A key strategy, and one that really resonates here, is the establishment of clear boundaries. The narrator's mother explicitly made her rules clear. She chose her own peace over pretending everyone was happy in the family. This wasn't just a personal preference. It was a profound act of self-preservation in the face of ongoing trauma and, frankly, disrespect from the father's expectations.
Those boundaries become essential for survival, almost.
Yeah, they really do. We could even explore the types of boundaries, emotional ones, physical distance, financial separation, and the psychological fortitude it takes to uphold them, especially when societal pressures might push for reconciliation at any cost. How do you communicate these boundaries effectively when the very foundation of trust has been decimated? And what are the long-term impacts, both positive and negative, on all parties, particularly the children, when such firm lines have to be drawn? Establishing these boundaries is a clear alternative to continued engagement in a damaging dynamic. It offers a path, maybe the only path, to healing for the wronged party. Then there's co-parenting. In circumstances like these, it's shown to be incredibly challenging, maybe even impossible, in a truly functional, healthy sense. The father's expectation to attend the graduation party at the mother's home, despite his history of cheating and forming a whole new family on the ruins of the old one, it demonstrates a profound lack of respect for any established boundaries.
Or just basic empathy, maybe.
Perhaps. The alternative, in this specific case, became that firm refusal, highlighted by the narrator's direct confrontation. This illustrates that effective co-parenting often requires a level of respect, maturity, and communication that might be entirely impossible after such a deep betrayal. The narrator's choice to speak their truth effectively set a new, unyielding boundary for future interactions. It made it crystal clear that the past would not be ignored just for the sake of a pleasant facade.
So that kind of direct honesty, even if harsh, becomes an alternative itself.
Ironically, yes, an alternative to continued painful pretense, even if it creates further separation. True co-parenting ideally demands a focus on the children's well-being above personal grievances, but that's a standard often unattainable after such profound relational damage has occurred. And we can also consider the involvement of a third party. Now, while the source describes the other woman as the destructive third party in the original betrayal.
Right, the one who caused the problem.
Exactly, but in the context of finding alternatives for managing the aftermath, a neutral third party, like a mediator or a family therapist, could potentially help navigate the complexities. They might help with co-parenting logistics or establishing respectful boundaries where direct communication is just too fraught with trauma, triggers, and past hurt.
Someone to facilitate the practical stuff without dredging up the emotional minefield every time.
Precisely. A mediator might focus on practical arrangements for the children, aiming for functional interaction rather than any kind of emotional reconciliation. A therapist could help individuals process their trauma and develop strategies for self-preservation and boundary setting. These alternatives are all about finding ways to manage relationships that simply can no longer operate on traditional expectations. They often prioritize healing and firm boundaries over a forced, unnatural, and probably unsustainable reconciliation. And you see this reflected in the Reddit community discussions, too. People often suggest these kinds of mediated or structured approaches as ways to navigate severe family dysfunction.
Yeah, it's always insightful to see how the broader community weighs in on these deeply personal moral puzzles. What did the collective wisdom of online forums like Reddit and the source material actually say about this situation? Did they lean one way or another on the obligations of support after such profound betrayal? Or did they find nuance in all the messiness?
Well, when generalized, discussing that core dilemma, should someone provide support after betrayal when they're suffering from emotional exhaustion, the Reddit community often leans pretty strongly towards an NTA, not the asshole, consensus. They largely agree that the individual has a fundamental right to protect their own mental and emotional well-being after such a significant breach of trust.
So prioritizing self-preservation is seen as valid.
Very much so. The reasoning behind this supportive stance is generally that genuine support simply cannot be forced when someone is already emotionally depleted and dealing with deep trauma. The community recognizes that asking someone to provide comfort from an emotionally empty place isn't just unsustainable, it's potentially re-traumatizing for the person being asked. So this NTA stance prioritizes self-preservation in the face of deep hurt. It acknowledges that an obligation to support, whatever that means, can really only extend as far as one's emotional capacity allows, especially when the foundational vows have been so fundamentally broken. It's a powerful validation of personal healing over a perceived duty that might inflict further harm.
But what's fascinating here is the nuance. Because while that general principle leans NTA for protecting oneself, it's important to consider another specific case that was mentioned in our source material. This was a particular Reddit post involving characters named Connor and his sister. Now, in that specific narrative, Connor had recently exposed his sister's past infidelity to her current partner, Hunter. His reasoning. Connor himself had a really strong moral stance against cheating, which stemmed from their own shared family trauma involving abandonment.
Right, a different context, but still involving betrayal and trauma.
Exactly. However, the community's decision for that specific story wasn't NTA, it was ESH, meaning everyone sucks here. That's a very different take, indicating a much more complex web of moral judgments.
It absolutely is, and it really highlights the complexity of real-life situations compared to maybe simpler hypotheticals. While the community acknowledged the gravity of Connor's sister's past cheating and even understood Connor's motivation rooted in his own trauma and perhaps a misguided desire for honesty, they also felt his act of exposing her secret was a form of betrayal in itself. And furthermore, they felt the sister's immediate response of completely kicking him out of her life was too harsh. Users questioned if her reaction was inadvertently repeating the pattern of abandonment they both experienced as children, drawing a direct parallel to their shared past trauma.
So they saw fault on both sides.
Yes, they suggested alternative forms of punishment or maybe a temporary break rather than such an absolute, immediate severing of ties. They argued for a more measured response that considered the brother's own pain and perspective, however flawed his actions were. And adding another layer, some users questioned why the sister hadn't disclosed her own past cheating directly to her partner, Hunter, earlier in their relationship, especially knowing his strong feelings about infidelity.
So a lack of honesty on her part too, potentially.
Potentially contributing to the eventual explosion. This ESH verdict demonstrates a really complex community perspective. It acknowledges wrongdoing on multiple sides. It still upholds the right to personal boundaries, but it also critically examines the severity and appropriateness of the responses. The community in these forums often demonstrates a thoughtful, though frequently divided, perspective on how best to offer supportive responses to intense family trauma. It underscores that even in situations of betrayal, the ethical landscape is rarely just black and white. It shows a nuanced understanding that even when someone is deeply wronged, their reaction can still be critiqued for its impact and its potential for causing further harm or leaving issues unresolved, especially when children or deep family history are involved.
So after diving this deep, what are the enduring lessons we can take away from this really complex and honestly heart-wrenching exploration? What truly matters when vows are broken, when trust is shattered, especially when children are involved and their entire world gets reshaped by adult choices and the deep trauma that follows?
Well, I think this narrative offers some crucial lessons, particularly regarding honesty, boundaries, and the true nature of support. Firstly, it really clarifies the distinction between practical help and emotional help. While practical help might sometimes feel like a civic obligation in certain contexts, like ensuring children are fed and housed, the basic necessities, genuine emotional support, simply cannot be coerced. It cannot be reliably given from a place of deep trauma and profound emotional exhaustion.
The well is dry.
The well is dry. The community verdict of NTA in many similar cases affirms this. You simply cannot give what you don't have, especially emotionally when you have been profoundly hurt. And that's a vital understanding for both the person needing support and the person being asked to give it. Distinguishing between acts of duty and acts of genuine compassion is key. Secondly, the story really underscores the vital importance of honesty versus, say, fake loyalty or just keeping the peace. Remember the narrator's decision to confront their father with the truth. It's because of your affair, not mom. Despite the discomfort, despite the father's attempts to deflect blame, that was an act of reclaiming their reality. It was refusing to participate in a lie. This kind of honesty, though incredibly difficult, is essential for authentic healing. It's necessary for setting clear, genuine expectations for relationships moving forward, if they move forward at all. Pretending everything is fine only perpetuates the trauma and postpones any true resolution.
Living in truth, even a painful truth.
Exactly. Recognizing that genuine honesty provides a more stable, if sometimes rockier, foundation than a delicate facade built on denial and unspoken resentments. And finally, the narrative powerfully illustrates boundaries as protection. They aren't just walls, they are protective measures. The mother's choice to prioritize her peace and set firm boundaries against pretending everything was fine, and the narrator's subsequent stand. They exemplify how boundaries are not primarily punitive acts. They are essential acts of self-preservation. They protect from further trauma.
Creating a safe space to heal.
Precisely. They are necessary for healing and for creating a safe emotional space, especially after such profound betrayal. These lessons, I think, aren't just for the individuals in the specific story. They're for anyone navigating the incredibly difficult aftermath of betrayal. And the welfare of children is so deeply intertwined with these choices. Ultimately, honesty and clear boundaries, even if they lead to separate lives, provide a more stable foundation for children than a facade of familial unity built on lies, secrets, and unacknowledged pain. These are the hard truths that allow for genuine, if sometimes difficult, paths forward, recognizing that true support cannot be extracted from a depleted soul.
This deep dive has definitely touched on some incredibly raw and universal themes. We've explored betrayal, obligations, the sanctity, or perhaps the fragility of vows, the profound impact of trauma, the debilitating reality of emotional exhaustion, and that non-negotiable need for authenticity and protected boundaries. It leaves us, and hopefully you, with a challenging question to ponder. Should vows, those promises made, outweigh personal boundaries after a deep betrayal? Where do you draw the line? We invite you to share your thoughts, your insights, perhaps even your experiences if you feel comfortable. Let's continue this conversation.